All right, so this media claim was about uphill cycling in recreational athletes, and it was a claim stating that climbing up a hill while seated is actually more aerodynamically efficient than climbing while standing. And these are two cyclists, one seated and one standing. Both are climbing a section during the Tour de France. So we're going to figure out if there is any research saying that climbing while seated is more efficient than climbing while standing. So, does this article support its claim with scientific research? While the article mentions scientific research as a whole about this topic, the only actual experiment that it links to is one that was done by their own employees with one subject on a single day with no control group or accurate measurements of efficiency. So basically what they did was they had a section of hill marked out, and this one person rode up the hill seated and standing twice in one day, and basically the way that they measured if it was more efficient or less efficient was which did it take him less time to do. And it's not a very valid way of measuring it. However, there was plenty of actual research related to this debate of standing versus seated climbing. So it was a study that was a collaborative study done out of the University of Colorado and the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Sadly, now, as much of a joy as it would be to imagine dogs or little mice pedaling uphill on bicycles, only humans were actually studied in this experiment. 7 competitive human cyclists with VO2 maxes of around 66 mLs per kg per minute were recruited for the study. The study involved 2 separate VO2 max tests, one while standing and one while seated, and 8 separate uphill cycling trials with varying combinations of 2 different grades, 4 and 10%, 2 different RPM frequencies, rotation per minute, 48 and 60 RPMs, and obviously the 2 positions that we are looking at, the seated and standing position. There was no control group, as a control group would be considered to be one who cycled with no grade. So because the only 2 grades measured were 4% and 10%, there was no control group. So the study actually did address the claim fairly well. The results showed a significantly lower VO2 and heart rate while in the seated position at a 10% grade at both pedaling frequencies, 48 and 60 RPMs. However, the results showed no significant difference in VO2 or heart rate at either frequency while cycling at a 10% grade. RPE was significantly lower while standing at a 10% grade. So this led to the possible conclusion that seated cycling at moderate grades is physiologically easier, while standing cycling at more intense grades seems to be mentally easier. So basically, physiologically, it's easier for people to cycle uphill seated when they're at a moderate incline, and at a really steep hill, it's not physiologically easier to do either of them. Both of them are equally physiologically take about the same effort, but mentally, standing seems to be easier. Because this study had very few subjects, however, the results aren't incredibly valid and more research should be done to verify these findings. The study was paid for by the respective universities of the researchers, so the study seems to be relatively free of bias from that side. So should we shoot the messenger, as this biathlon athlete would probably hit a bullseye? Actually, all in all, I think this study addressed the claim, but didn't prove it. I think that the researchers made no outright assertions claiming that seated cycling uphill is definitely more efficient than standing cycling, which I agree with because the study had no control group, it had a very small sample size, and the findings weren't consistent across all inclines. For example, there was no significant difference physiologically at a steep incline, and even mentally, standing cycling seemed to be easier at a steeper incline than seated cycling. So basically, the magazine's claim was unsubstantiated by either its own experiment, because it wasn't a very valid experiment, or the research article that we found, because the research article didn't make any assertions claiming that seated cycling is for sure easier going up an incline than standing cycling.